Hey Minot, 2020 is the year for more. Yes, it's the U.S. Census season, and with it, Minot could see more. More opportunities for business, more federal funding for roads, for our schools, and for our community. Take part in something more. Take the census, because for us, more means more. Visit minotnd.org to learn more.
Still tastes like coffee. Yeah. Very strong coffee. Very strong. Truly enjoy.
Yeah, because I'll probably abstain.
Okay.
We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, Monday, May 4th. I do want to ask that any of the folks in the audience or staff, and then the council members, make sure that their phones and electronic devices are on silent or muted to keep the distractions down to a minimum. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Janser,
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
Here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Number 3 on our agenda is the mayor's report. I did have quite a few different items that were listed on here, and that was specific to the meetings. I will briefly go through some of these. On the 7th, of course, we did have the JIC press briefing. Those have been held here at City Council chambers every Tuesday. They had originally started at 3 or 3:30 and then been bumped back to about 2:30. Of course, that has been with 1st District Health Unit, Ward County Emergency Management, Minot Public Schools, and then the Parks Department and others as well, helping the 8-county region, of course, as well as the city of Minot through the last, I would say, 4 weeks or more of COVID-19. On the 8th, the CTE NDR program meeting, the NDR update, as well as Governor Burgum's conference call, task force meeting for COVID-19 on the 9th, then MADC board meeting, the Western Dakota Energy Association conference call. We saw some of the preliminary numbers, I believe last week, from our finance director here on some of those projections. And then we also did have the IEDC steering committee meeting on the 9th. On the 13th, we did have a couple of meetings as well, the City Hall technical team and a conference call with Minot Air Force Base. I do want to reference that I've been in, I would say, regular communication with Minot Air Force Base just for an update on what has been going on with the airmen up at the Air Force Base, as well as some of their strategic components of how they had went into a much tighter lockdown than even the city of Minot and the state of North Dakota did, but also on what they're doing in terms of opening a few things back up, their parks and some other limited activities. On the 14th, we did have a joint information press briefing, again, Board of Equalization. On the 15th, another conference call with the governor and COVID task force meeting. The 20th, conference call with the attorney, Patricia Munson. Of course, we talked about that previously here, and then had the special city council meeting on the 20th, and then the regular city council meeting on the 20th. 21st, another JIC press conference briefing. We did on the 22nd have a discussion with Hess that involved myself, members of the Minot Public Schools, and then the county and a few other partners in the community. Hess was looking out on how they might be able to reach out into the community to help and assist, whether it be not necessarily monetary donations, but in some sort of impactful way relating to either the children or the community itself. And they have come away with a couple of different ideas that I think that they're going to be pushing forward. One of them that I don't want to give everything away, but involved the mayors at where some of their Hess regional headquarters are located at, reading children's books, and something that the children will be able to click online, whether it be storybooks or bedtime stories for the different mayors, as well as other, let's say, I think what they're hoping for is celebrities. I'm not putting myself in that category, but other notable people from the community that Hess is in. So we can look forward to that. I'll jump down here again to the 27th, Minot Air Force Base update. The 28th, Governor Burgum's conference call. Again, we had been doing that on a weekly basis. Joint information press briefing on the 30th, COVID task force. And then on the 30th, I did have a Zoom meeting with Census Valley Animal Shelter that did involve kind of an update on the emergency operation plan that had to do with the sheltering of the animals. Of course, almost all of the people, and I believe all of the people at the Census Valley Animal Shelter, are entirely different from those folks that were there in 2011. So trying to get everybody on an understanding if there was an emergency sheltering plan in place, how that worked in 2011, and more so that it didn't overwhelm the folks at the Census Valley Animal Shelter, not knowing what that looked like or what kind of process that would be for them. Working also with Alderman Strait on that and finishing out the emergency operation plan for the snakes. The 21st, we did have another JIC press briefing. I'm sorry, I forgot to advance here. On the 1st then, we did have Governor Burgum's budget that was available online. I also did talk with the owner of the Saber Dogs on the 1st for a little bit of an update as well on what they're hoping. They're hoping for a July start for the Saber Dogs in the Magic City. They had sent out a press release last week on that. Of course, all of it is going to be dependent on the opening up, but they're excited and still committed to coming back. And even if they do see a complete wash of the 2020 season, they're committed to coming back in 2021, but I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to have some normalcy back at Corbett Field, as well as some other folks playing ball later on. Outside of that, numerous phone calls, emails, social media, staff interactions, the COVID updates, and much, much more. It's been tremendously busy April and May, without a question. Alderman Straight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you just give us a quick update on that IEDC steering committee meeting? What is happening, if anything?
We do have another update for the IEDC right now. Initially, we had met to take a look at what, if any, we could identify for business impacts within the community, something that we might have as, let's say, measurement for impact. Some of that has been tracking both with most of this, I should rephrase that, all of this has been done by phone conference with all of our partners, keeping track of closures, impact that we could measure. Most of this has actually come back to what we have already seen on the national level in terms of the different programs available on the Fed for relief. Outside of that, we have not had a lot of COVID impact simply because the numbers weren't trackable as far as direct impact. Sales tax is the best we could do. We're hoping, I think, to as things start to open up, get a better idea, and having a couple of those more meetings, more information coming from the chamber, Visit Minot, probably Souris Basin and the other partners. But right now, it's informational gathering. Continue.
If I could just follow up, I don't want to get into the NDR discussion about economic resiliency, but there's a pot of money obviously in there, and I'd be curious to hear, sir, maybe the next update through Mr. Zakian of how those dollars could possibly be utilized to impact community-wide while also kind of hitting the key target area that it's meant to. Obviously, people are hurting in the business community in particular, and that's I just wanted to put it out there within the conversation of that title, sir.
You bet. And just for a quick reference on that, and I think that was an email or a correspondence sent out by Mr. Zakian earlier, that discussion has been held. It will take a congressional action to actually change how that NDR dollars, how they can be used. And that conversation is ongoing, actually, in Washington, but it will take Congress, both the House and the Senate, to collectively pass a bill to allow that.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on my different activities throughout the month of April and May? If not, I would then turn it over to our Finance Director, Acting City Manager, Mr. David Lakefield, for his report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We have hopefully a brief report for you all this evening. We'll get started on it. I know we have a lot on our agenda. Excuse me. Some of the important dates we have coming up: Planning Commission, Magic Fund, the press conference for the COVID on May 12th, a Chamber Board meeting the 19th, again a City Council meeting on the 18th, and then obviously with Memorial Day, city offices will be closed. May 12th through the 14th, the city is going to host a Chamber Candidate Forum. The Chamber was looking for a location, and with the restrictions now with gatherings, those types of things, it didn't make sense to rent a room somewhere and not have people be able to attend. They are going to utilize the council chambers to do that, so we can live stream the candidate forum, so we can still continue to do that, but with a little bit different approach to it. So that will be coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and the chamber will do the asking the questions and the moderating and all of that type of thing. We're just merely the location and facilitating with the broadcast. All right, the 2021 budget is going to be here before you know it. It is here when we speak on the Jarvis project, and Jarvis is our new enterprise resource planning software, and the name was selected through a competition with city employees, and it stands for Just Another Rather Very Intelligent System. So it's a movie reference, and so that's the name that was chosen. Budget module is the first module to be implemented, and our go live date is here on May 1st, so we are here already. Tomorrow and the next day, we will be doing training sessions with the end users at Public Works and downstairs here and have a Tyler resource on hand through GoToMeetings. So we're already started. We did a practice run with the training with some critics last week, and I think so far things went pretty well with that. We should provide maybe a little bit quicker reaction times when things don't go the way we anticipate. But the initial reaction from the end users is it looks like it's going to be very easy for them to use. And hopefully we can follow through with that. And of course, we'll continue to make improvements once it rolls out here as well. So before and after, I know we've made this comparison before that we're going from the Flintstones to the Jetsons. So we just threw a couple of screenshots up here, hopefully if it works. Here's our current system when we're working on budget entry. And here is the new system with budget entry. And it's cut off here on the screen, but you can see some of that historical data is right there on the screen for easy reference. It gives you totals on the top there so you can really see what you're doing. The little plus sign on the very left-hand side, you can click on that to add additional detail. So it's definitely, you know, apples and oranges comparison here between the two softwares. So we're excited about that. Budget priorities. We need our direction on how we're going to develop this budget. And I think in light of some of the events that have happened in the last 6 to 8 weeks, we kind of know where some of that direction is going to lead us. So what we did is we had the department heads submit list of budget priorities, and then we kind of whittled them down to a few of them. And this is an agenda item for later this evening as well for the council to finalize these or give us additional guidance. So these are some of the ones that made the short list, so to speak. Maintain, and these are in no particular order, by the way, either. Maintain compliance with all regulatory and safety requirements. Obviously, we need to make sure that what we're doing follows the rules and maintains a safe environment. Responsive, transparent, and responsible city government. Invest in human capital by retaining current workforce and attracting committed long-term employees. This has been an ongoing initiative that we've been working on for the last couple of years, so we're continuing to look at that. Well-planned and well-maintained city infrastructure and prioritizing the maintenance of existing assets before investing in additional assets. Leverage the investment in technology to improve the availability of information and improve transparency, and some of those projects are well underway already. Reward the conservation of resources and effective budget management, and continue to advance long-term projects critical to our community, such as NAS, flood control, landfill expansion, as well as others. And continue to expand long-term planning efforts. So these are some of the highlights that we narrowed things down to, and obviously we'll be looking forward to your input on that item later this evening. 2020 projects. We have a lot going on, even though we've postponed a couple of big projects here in the last month or two. We still have a lot going on around town. The one that's one of the most obvious right now is the Broadway panel replacement. This is some carryover work from 2019. It's expected to last a few weeks. Traffic's impacted from 16th Avenue to 20th Avenue. I think initially some of the work was further north than that. So hopefully we'll be moving through that relatively quickly. Crack sealing will be done, the entire construction area. It should be low impact and done as a moving operation. 31st Avenue Southeast reconstruction project. If you've been out in that area, if you were out in that area prior to construction beginning, that road had deteriorated substantially. I was out there here a week or so ago and looked, and the things are tore up, and they're definitely moving along with that. So it started on April 13th. First phase included closing the intersection at 31st Avenue and 13th Street Southeast. It extends east to the east side of 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th, so that whole stretch of road there. 6th Street Southeast is also closed between 28th Avenue and 31st Avenue Southeast. The residents will not have access directly off of 31st, and they're encouraged to use 37th Avenue for access. 10th Street Southwest Storm Sewer District is going to impact that intersection. The traffic signal will be changed out, and the project will install trunk storm sewer and replace deteriorated pavement. And this is a project that's been in the works for quite some time as well. Flood control, MI1, the contractor had a good winter for construction, and they've continued to make progress there. They've started working on the avenue by 4th and 5th Avenue near 3rd Street. Flood walls and stormwater pump work continues, and the flood walls are scheduled to be completed in that phase approximately June of 2020. MI23, the work has resumed relocating the water line, and they continue to work on finishing the levee, the utilities, curb gutter, and miscellaneous work there. This is a map of some of the additional projects that we're working on. Water main replacement, 30th Avenue Northeast Sanitary Sewer Project, mill and overlay projects, patching projects, and some signal improvements. The Highway Safety Improvement Program project, which is the rapid flashing beacons at the zoo and the courthouse for the pedestrian crossings. Cleanup week should have been held, I believe, this past week, and due to the restrictions and some of the limitations going on, it wasn't feasible to do that cleanup week here in the spring. So as an alternative, the sanitation folks offered a free dump week, and it was very successful. On average, generally, there's about 90 residents using the free dump week in prior years. This year and this week, it was 1,136. So substantially increased traffic. And they delivered about 80% of the tonnage typically collected during the cleanup weeks. So even though we didn't collect it, about 80% of that tonnage still found its way to the landfill. So pretty successful. They have decided that they would extend this for another week to see if we can't get that other 20% cleaned up. So it was a very good program. Obviously not what was anticipated, but they made things work. The Return to Work program, we've had a lot of questions on this last week as we began to loosen restrictions and open up some businesses. Employees are a little bit apprehensive in some cases about what our plan will be. And our message to them was that we're not just going to open the doors and everyone is going to rush back in. The return will be gradual and, in phases. And we're following the state's guidelines. Even though things opened up to a lot of businesses last Friday, the state capitol is still by appointment only. State employees that are working remotely are continuing to work remotely, and that's been our approach as well. I know in the finance department we have these trainings scheduled in the next couple of days, so some of our staff that has been working remotely will be in the office for a little bit this week. But again, we're trying to maintain our distance and schedule things so we don't have everybody at one place at one time and maybe alternate those returns coming back or have some in the office for 2 days during the week and working remotely and flip back and forth. We'll continue to follow the state guidance and update our plan accordingly. The library is also working on their plan to open up. And if any of you have looked at some of the limitations imposed by the return to work or the reopening plan outlined by the state, the sanitation and cleaning things is a high priority, and rightfully so. It becomes pretty difficult when you have a building the size of the library if you suddenly have a bunch of people rummaging through there to follow along and maintain those standards of cleanliness. So the library is working on a plan to move forward, and it's outlined here that they would have to limit capacity like a lot of the stores do. Under 16 would have to be accompanied. And then when they open up or further open up, the services will be limited. And again, that is to, help to maintain that distancing and also to keep things cleaned up in between patrons. The financial update. The Business Accelerator Fund, this is something that was asked for at the last council meeting, and this is just a little bit of a snapshot. I also laid on the desk there for you printout that Lindsay had submitted outlining some of the activity that they have had. They have some loans that are approved and in the works, but because of the COVID pandemic have been delayed or held off on. So we don't know how that will impact things over time. They have had a number of investments or loans that have gone through, and they wanted to highlight that for what has been loaned out through the Business Accelerator Fund, they have leveraged over $7 million of private investment, 77 jobs. 5 projects are located in Minot. The 6th one is just west of town, and 3 of these projects are in downtown Minot. So they're optimistic that they have more need in front of them. So we'll continue to keep the council updated on that activity. Revenue update. We don't have any real updates to the news. We continue to keep an eye on our revenues as they come in. And again, some of these are trailing indicators. So we get the collections a month or in some cases 2 months after the collections come into the state agency. So we will start to see those here in the next few weeks. And we'll have a better idea of the impacts. The Hub City models, we got an updated model late last week on that. And that continues, even though it shows a decrease, it continues to be better than what our first anticipation was. And it's been fairly consistent with the latest model run. So we're hoping that because of the way that formula is structured, that is going to remain stable and probably not as bad as we first anticipated. Airport revenue loss, obviously with the air transportation and some of the impacts, and then that flows through to rental cars and parking revenues and things like that. The good news is with the CARES Act, there is some funding that's available to the airport here, and it looks like that funding should offset losses that we anticipate coming through. Staff updates. Operations, we continue to monitor workloads. There's a lot going on in town. We have some big construction projects. We have a couple of big software projects with many different departments involved in that. So we continue to keep an eye on that, monitoring the folks that are working remotely to make sure we're still being efficient and no one is getting overloaded. And then the remaining projects are continuing as planned. We've had some bid openings that have been very favorable, so hopefully we're getting a little better bang for our buck as well. Moving forward, and this is going to be another topic of discussion for later on this evening. I did send out a brief message over the weekend, just an update of our department head meeting last week on Thursday. I think our general consensus at that meeting was the current structure with modifications is the most logical at this time and probably would have the least impact or disruption to operations. I think our general consensus was that required improvement in communications is essential regardless of what the structure looks like. Some upcoming items just to have on your radar screen, the elections. Ballot applications are being mailed out by the Secretary of State's office. I know mine came in the mail over the weekend, so we're going to have some communication coming out. I think Derek told me tomorrow with some instructions and guidance on what they need to do and the timelines required of that. Also, second penny sales tax ordinance is being drafted and updated and will be on an agenda soon. This is well in advance. It's about a year and a half ahead of its proposed sunset, but we want to have this out in front of you early so we can plan accordingly and get that language cleaned up. We have inquired from our financial advisor that handles our bond sales on some of the language details, because a portion of this sales tax penny is dedicated to flood control. And so we want to make sure that we have that language in there. So if we bond for flood control, that we have the language that they're looking for in the ordinance. That's all I have. I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Any questions for Dave at this time? I think we're going to tackle the bigger issue that you had referenced towards the end of the meeting, but any other questions for Dave at this juncture? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next on our agenda is number 5, the city attorney's report. We did have a report that was also submitted on a PDF form, both online and to our emails. Ms. City Attorney, Madam City Attorney, do you have anything further?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I can answer any questions from the written report. Otherwise, that's all I have for you.
Questions for our city attorney this evening? Appreciate it, Kelly. Thank you. Item number 6 on our agenda is the consent items. I've been asked to pull 6.8. We have 6.1 through 6.7 and 6.9 through 6.14. The remainder of the items, are there any other items that need to be pulled within that set? If not, I would look for a motion. Alderman Pittner.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we move consent on the remaining items.
Motion to move consent on 6.1 through 6.7, 6.9 through 6.14. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes.
Motion approved. That takes us to 6.8, the award of the bid, electronic door locks in City Hall and Police Department building. The Minot Police Department and City Hall are in the process of upgrading the access control features of the entire building. Part of those improvements is the addition of the electronic door locks with wireless programming capabilities. The recommendation to City Council was to approve the award of bid to the computer store in the amount of $64,815. Is there a motion? Motion by Alderman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson. Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Abstain.
Motion approved. That takes us to our action items number 7. 7.1 is the new lease term and condition for Scott Aviation Wilson Scott. Wilson Scott, also known as Scott Aviation, currently leases the real estate from the Minot International Airport. On March 16, 2020, the City Council authorized notice to serve to Mr. Scott that he was in default of the terms of his lease. The notice was given nearly 1 year after the initial inspection of the leased property, and improvements indicated that the building was in a severe state of disrepair and that the requirements of an aeronautical purpose for the property was not being met. The airport has drafted terms and conditions it would deem acceptable in order to renew the lease for an additional 20 years. These include a detailed timeline requiring repair of the structure and a verifiable aeronautical purpose. City staff recommendations to the City Council is to review the proposed ground lease and hangar development agreement and authorize the mayor to enter into the agreement.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. Questions maybe for our airport director or possibly our city attorney. I'm not completely sure who wants to tackle this, but Rick, we've been through this process because we had some disagreements with Mr. Scott, and we seem to have come to an agreement where everybody's here, but we're still hopeful that the aviation use will be achieved. We're not quite there yet, and improvements to the structure. So what are our protections or remedy in the event that we do not see those things that we are seeking happen?
Sure. Mayor Sitma, Alderman Walski, if you'll recall, we were working with an agreement that was last put in place 20 years ago. And that agreement allowed for the lessee to renew when offered new terms and conditions by the city. And we proposed those new terms and conditions with a couple things in mind. One was to ensure that the building got cleaned up and was structurally sound. And the other was to ensure an aeronautical purpose. And we were able to put those stipulations and be very specific about what that entailed in this new lease, which was missing from the old lease. So we have every expectation that the lessee will live up to the obligation of fixing the building and having an aeronautical use in there. And if that does not happen, we have the ability to move in fairly quickly and terminate the lease and move on. That's what I want.
Any other questions for our Airport Director, Alderman Janser?
Yes, Rick, was the 20-year term mandatory in the renewal part?
I'm getting a nod from the city attorney, Mr. Mayor, and Alderman Janser that yes, it was. And part of that is that unlike one that we did 6 months ago or so, where we did a 1-year term to ensure compliance, this building requires so much structural refurbishment that it would be difficult to ask somebody to make the financial investment to fix the building and then give them only a 1-year lease and perhaps have the rug pulled out from under them after that. So as long as they live up to the terms of the lease, we'll be able to ensure that for the next 20 years, the building is being used as intended.
Thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to speak to this, and I appreciate all the hard work that went into this, the collaboration from city department heads. I was able to tag along on one of the inspections of the building to see what we looked as far as repairs that were required, cleanup that was required. The building needed a lot of love, whether it was holes in the roof or mold on the walls or mildew. I mean, it was neglected to a great extent. So I think it's a win-win. We have a tenant in place that pays their rent, but just needs to take a little better care of the building. And if we have that, but the city's also in a position to protect itself and make sure that that's happens and that building doesn't sit as it was for another 20 years. So again, I commend from legal to building inspectors to Rick, a lot of collaborative effort to make it get to this point. So hopefully it's a win-win for everybody involved.
Alderman Walski.
More follow-up. Rick, the rate, the new rate per square foot, does that have a built-in escalator in some form, or does that get reviewed on a regular basis? I would hope that 20 years from now, we're not at that same exact rate.
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Walski, yes, it is tied to CPI, I believe, and it gets reviewed regularly and increases. The rate that is put in there is now our current and updated land lease rate for any properties that we sign new contracts with or new leases with in that area.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Any other discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion to approve and a second. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Quadrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes.
Motion approved. 7.2 is the settlement agreement approval. J&C Rental owns commercial property at 115 First Avenue Northeast and is asking for partial reimbursement of alleged storm sewer overcharges on their utility bill. Two recommendations before us tonight is the approval of the settlement agreement release and covenant not to sue, and two, authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser for approval.
Second.
Second by Alderman Walski. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Last call for discussion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson. Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion approved. That takes us to 7.3, the Developers Agreement Essential Townhomes. The Essential Townhomes Edition was approved by Planning Commission in March 2020 and by the City Council in April of 2020. Developers Agreement protects the city interest and ensures the necessary work within public right-of-way associated with a newly developed or redeveloped property will be completed by developers in accordance with the city standards and policy. The recommendation before us is to approve the Essential Townhomes Developers Agreement with Essential Living, Inc., and authorize the mayor to sign.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Straight. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Last call for discussion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson? Yes. Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yeah.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion approved. 7.4 is the inclusion of a disclaimer to 2019 evaluations completed by the former city manager. On March 9th, 2020, the Minot City Council voted 5-2 to hire an independent counsel to investigate whether a hostile work environment existed within the city, primarily among the department heads, also referred to as the executive team, and the city manager, Tom Barry. The investigation began Monday, March 16th, 2020, after approval of an agreement with Patricia Munson. Her conclusion in the report showed that there was a hostile working environment which resulted in desperate, let's see here if I can even read my own handwriting here, desperate treatment of employees and lower scoring for the 2019 employee evaluations that was retributive and retaliatory. City of Minot Personnel Ordinance states that the performance evaluation shall be made permanent part of the personnel file. As such, destruction of the already completed evaluations would not be proper course of action to correct inaccurate information. Rather, it is suggested that a disclaimer with the support of documentation questioning the reliability and objectivity of the evaluations be included with each. The recommendation before council tonight is to include a disclaimer to the 2019 evaluations of all subordinates of the former city manager Tom Barry due to the reliability and objectivity of the evaluations. Included with the disclaimer will be a copy of the full final investigation of report by the independent counsel Patricia Munson and meeting minutes from April 20th, 2020, special city council meeting which terminated Mr. Barry's employment.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve. Second by Alderman Janser. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Olson.
A question for the HR director.
Good evening, Ms. John.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Will this go into everyone's file that had an evaluation by the former city manager, or will this be at the request of the employee?
We indicated that this would go on every individual because we have questions on the scoring for all of the above, not just those individuals that might have issues. We thought it would be consistent to go with everybody's.
May I continue?
Continue.
Do you foresee any employee being opposed to that?
I guess I have not asked that question, but it certainly could be happen, yes.
And I guess that would be my recommendation, to give the employees the option of having that included in their file, if that seems appropriate.
Certainly.
Okay.
If you want to include that, if you want to include that in the motion, that would be fine as well.
Yes, so that would come as an amendment, Mr. Mayor?
That would be a motion to amend to have at the request of the employee for the disclaimer.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Motion to amend. Is there a second for that motion to amend?
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. Is that correct? I did.
Yep,
Sorry.
I'll take it.
Okay. Discussion on the motion to amend. Alderman Straight, you look like you have a question.
Mr. Mayor, if it's just an amendment, wouldn't just the initial motion maker and the second just clarify that?
Could I include that
Could
in
be
my?
either way.
Could I?
okay.
I'll include, maybe for the sake of
Expediency.
trying not to confuse anyone. I'll include that in my original motion.
I will ask the motion maker and the second to withdraw the motion to amend and to include that.
Withdrawn.
Yes.
Okay, included in the original motion.
There's the second on the motion.
And Janser was the second on the motion? The original motion? Okay. So we've got that straightened away. Any other questions from Ms. Junt? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Lisa, would it be, and I know we're just kicking around the idea of like a 360 review, would it be at all reasonable to have, for these department heads, even at their discretion again, to have a supplemental review done by their subordinates or by other, however that 360 review would shake out, to have something, so they did have something, maybe not just a question mark behind a review, good or bad, but maybe a review. I don't know if that's possible or not. If it's too far past the fact to include something like that, just so there was a review.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, some of the department heads already do have that done by their subordinates. I think we're a little bit late in the process, but I certainly don't see a problem with that moving ahead. I think that's a good idea.
Okay. Just want to throw that out there, just so that maybe they don't, if they have a bad review or a good review, they don't just have a red sticker on it. So just thought I'd put that out there.
Further questions for our Human Resource Director? Thank you, Ms. Junt. Any further discussion on the motion? Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, I'm going to be supporting the motion because I think we need to protect our employees, but I don't think it's a good idea to have to put people in the position of having to request something like this being put in the file. I think we have serious enough concerns about the objectivity and reliability of those ratings. Many, I think, were worse than they should have been, but it's possible some were better than they should have been. And I think it would be better just to take a pause on that whole year. Things like that happen. We'll have a more refined system in place very soon. I'm not thrilled with that, but I'm not going to oppose the motion because I think we do have to protect our employees and limit our liability.
Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pajagula, just as a clarification, I certainly support this because I believe that certain evaluations were very poor, and I think it was retaliatory. I don't want to see a good evaluation blemished. So that's the protection that I am trying to put in.
But what if the evaluation wasn't objective and reliable to begin with? I think it can go both ways, frankly. I'm not going to oppose it, but I think it'd be easier to have uniform practice.
I would just look to the objectivity and the professionalism of our Human Resource Department, which I know is fully capable of addressing the issue, so I too am going to support it. Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sima, thank you. I just wanted to echo Alderman Padragula's comments. I think the uniform policy is what I would prefer, but I absolutely believe we need to act on this issue, and I will support the motion this evening.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner?
Yes.
Pajagula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Motion approved. 7.5 is the public hearing, Tax Increment Financing District 2021, Blue on Broadway. This is a public hearing to consider the development of renewal plan submitted by Blue on Broadway LLC and to consider the development agreement between the City of Minot and Blue on Broadway LLC. Blue on Broadway LLC is requesting approval of a TIF district that will partially finance the construction of First Street Southwest between 16th Avenue and 17th Avenue. Blue on Broadway LLC is the developer of the Blue on Broadway mixed-use project that is located on a vacant parcel of land located between 1629 South Broadway. The Planning Commission and the City Council approved this project as planned unit development for the fall of 2019. Blue on Broadway LLC will build a 5-story building with commercial units on the first floor and LMI housing on the upper floors. If the City Council finds that the development or renewal plan complies with the city officials' urban renewal plan and general development plan and the NDCC Chapter 40 through 58, city staff recommends the approval of the development or renewal plan resolution relating to TIF districts 2020-1 and the approval of the development agreement. The 3 recommendations that are before us are the recommend approval of the TIF District 2020-1 and 2, authorize the mayor to sign the resolution, and 3, authorize the mayor to sign the development agreement with Blue on Broadway LLC. As this is a public hearing, we do have a couple of submitted comments that were sent in through the portal through minotnd.org on our website. I would look to our city clerk for those comments to be read.
Mayor Sitma and City Council, there were 2 comments submitted. The first was from Todd Burning regarding the reconstruction and public right-of-way from 16th to 17th Avenue on 1st Street Southwest. This is Mayor Sitma and members of City Council. We at Epic Companies take pride in what we have accomplished in my hometown of Minot. Epic and our sister food and beverage companies employ approximately 50 people on a year-round basis in the Magic City. We ask for your support in what is the final piece of rounding out 3 affordable housing projects: Park South Phase 1, Park South Phase 2, and the nicest affordable housing complex in the state, Blue on Broadway. The final piece is really how leveraged money works. Blue on Broadway is using over $5 million of private money, $4 million of NDR funds, and interest buy-down from the Bank of North Dakota. From the beginning of planning for this project, it was discussed among City of Minot staff and ourselves, how can we use this project to leverage finishing 1st Street Southwest between 16th and 17th Avenue. We collectively came up with a solution that will put the burden on the project and not any other adjacent landowners or taxpayers, even though dozens of area landowners adjacent to it and otherwise will benefit from the new road. We are basically building a public road with city specifications at no cost to other taxpayers other than Blue on Broadway. A win-win for the community of Minot. We ask for your support on the TIF process that will make the construction of what used to be referred to as the alley behind the Pepsi plant to a normal community paved street to be enjoyed by all. Sincerely on behalf of the Epic Companies team, Todd Burning, President. And the second is from Blake Nybakken. Mayor Sitma and members of City Council, thank you for hearing this matter at the proposed property tax abatement in conjunction with the Blue on Broadway affordable housing mixed-use development. As a condition of the approval of this project has already received, a requirement was placed on us to reconstruct 1st Street from 16th to 17th Avenue. Approving this abatement will allow us to amortize a portion of the cost associated with these public right-of-way improvements over the 5-year abatement period. This means that Blue on Broadway will pay for the entire cost of the 1st Street project up front at no cost to any adjacent property owner, and there will be no special assessments levied. The city will not be responsible for any of the costs, but the improvements are being designed to city specifications, and it will be constructed following city standards. The current property taxes will continue to be paid during the abatement period, and upon the expiration, taxes collected on this property are expected to increase by a multiple of 4 to 5 times. This abatement is absolutely critical for our affordable housing development to support the reconstruction of 1st Street. Without it, the economics don't work, and we will be looking for other possible solutions, which could impact the adjacent properties and delay the project, which we don't want to happen. Thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to the next step in making this project a reality. Sincerely, Blake Nybakken, VP of Development, Epic Companies.
Thank you, Kelly. Were there any other submissions from the online web portal on our website?
There were only those 2.
Okay, thank you. Given a public hearing, this is typically where we would ask folks to come forward that speak in favor or those that are opposed, again, because of the unique situation with the City Hall and public buildings closures. We would look then to close the public hearing as the only 2 submissions that were submitted online. For those folks that are watching at home, again, we hope that we were able to resume back to regular meetings as soon as possible, so that we don't have to rely simply on submissions from our web portal. But for folks that are understanding, that was available for the entire time that this was published, and we did have 2 submissions. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing and approve the item.
Motion by Alderman Janser to close the public hearing and to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once the road is completed, the city is going to have to maintain that, no?
I would
Thank
look
you,
to...
Mr. Mayor. I get a head nod. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Not a problem. My understanding is that we're taking care of the road now, and it would be just a better road to take care of afterwards.
Right. Thank you.
Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I guess I will tell you that I'm pleased as one of the people that was involved back years ago now in establishing the possibility for a TIF district and TIF projects to, at long last, finally see one that is being done. And so I think this is a good vehicle to get some things that, but for the TIF district wouldn't happen. In this case, it's a road that's going to be upgraded and constructed as part of this project, and at no immediate cost to the city, and it'll be taken care of over time by the tax and increment financing. So I'm pleased to see this, and I'm supportive of it.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe a question for, I guess, whoever wants to answer it. As far as the 20-year abatement of taxes, what happens to those taxes, the difference in what would be paid versus what is paid? Is that gone into a bucket and paid at the end of the 20 years, or is that just a forgiveness of tax value increase?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, this is a 5-year abatement. So, and in this case, the city or the county would not collect the tax on the increase in value until the period is over with. They would use that money to finance the public improvements up front. And they're taking a little bit of a risk here, because if property values don't appreciate as much as they anticipate, they may not recover as much of that cost through the TIF mechanism as they anticipated. So they are the ones that are at risk on this. If property values skyrocketed for some reason, it's unlikely that the increment in the tax with the value would ever exceed the public improvement costs.
Alderman Wolski.
Follow up to that. It's unlikely, Mr. Lakefield, but if it happened, is there a cap that the valuation cannot exceed the valuation of the public improvements?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, that language is included in the developer's agreement.
For the folks at home, it is clear that they will continue to pay the current value of that property tax. It's just the abatement for the 5 years of those increases. Any further discussion on the motion? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. From the beginning on this project, going back to last September when we were learning about the planned unit development, when that was approved, continuing to January when we approved the $4.7 million in the developer's agreement, I have supported this project. But as I indicated in January, this TIF is a new circumstance, and I did not realize it was in the pipeline. I supported the project at our first two actionable periods because, one, from a planning perspective, this is a smart project. Mixed use is smart development. Density returns good value to taxpayers. I supported the NDR dollars because at the time it was my understanding and assumption that the increased value from this property was going to provide a return to the taxpayers. And then obviously the infrastructure improvements also a value to the taxpayers, and in particular the other properties around that area. This is most definitely a section of street that I think needs to be improved, or we would benefit from having it improved. But as a matter of process, I don't like the fact that what I understood to be true in September was that the developer was responsible for the street, and that the value was going to be coming back to the taxpayers in January. And so I've got a little gripe with the process here, and I also have a little bit of a gripe with the principles associated with our economic development tools. I think the TIF is an extraordinarily powerful tool, but it is very difficult for me to get a full sense of how these things work, especially when we start layering them together. And in this case, we're layering $4 million plus of NDR dollars on top of another significant investment by the public. And I think that's the only way that this can be described is this is in fact the public paying for this road. And that's different to me than what was represented initially. If I'm in the developer's position, I know I would be advocating for exactly what they're advocating for. We work aggressively to use all the tools that are disposable and at our disposal and get a project that works as well as possible. But for these reasons, I just can't support this project tonight. And I hope in the future we're very careful about how we layer these economic development tools together, because they really muddy the issue and make it confusing in terms of how these things work. And as an example of that, I would point to our downtown property owners right now who are paying special assessments on their storm sewer and on their lighting. And in many cases, they're paying their own full freight for renovations on their buildings. I can think of 4 or 5 projects right now that are going where we have people paying the full amount of what it takes to redevelop a property, and paying their public infrastructure costs on top of that. And so this is just one of those areas where, on principle, I have to say no.
Any further discussion on the motion? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with some of the items that Alderman Wolski highlighted, and I disagree with some as well. I've been supported this project from the beginning. Again, I guess one of the main points I disagree on, that this was a good project from the planning phase. I don't. I think it's a square peg in a round hole, and I just can't get on board with the idea of subsidizing a bottom line to this extent. We can hang our hat on this provides LMI housing for 20 years. What happens when 20 years is up? Or 5 years when the taxes increase, rents go up after 20 years. It's no longer LMI housing, to my understanding. This is just a Band-Aid on an overall problem. I have approved projects like this in the past, one previously on our agenda. That's infill in an existing LMI area, projects that have been proven to work. This one right on Broadway with the traffic, with the crossings, with the saturation, the parking lack thereof, whether we are more strict than others in the state or not, I'm not a fan, and I don't think it is a great project from that perspective. Nothing against the developer. I think that we've seen good projects brought by this developer in the past. But again, I'm just not interested in subsidizing, and even further to this extent, to Alderman Wolski's point, this is essentially, in my opinion, paid for by the public with this TIF district. And to keep coming back for have the bottom line further subsidized for the economics of it, I can't get on board with, and I also will not be supporting this item.
Any further discussion on the motion? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just want to comment to the gentleman across from me. I'm really having a hard time hearing you all, and I don't know if it's just my poor hearing, but if you can lean in a little more to the mics, I'd appreciate it.
My wife usually tells me to be quiet at home, so yeah, I'm trained.
I'm really trying hard over here. Mr. Mayor, I've been supportive of this project from the beginning. I think sometimes it takes people that maybe have been around and at the table for a while to know how to do it and how to maximize all of the available tools. I can hear and completely understand Alderman Wolski's point. I'm going to be supportive of it today because I think as we look at projects, we may have not enjoyed the what we inherited with some of the NDR projects, but this one in particular, as I've looked at the challenges in many of the real estate developers that have property that decided to buy on the fringes and develop, that didn't also want to participate in the projects. This is one that I'm going to be curious to see how it moves forward. I can recognize on Broadway, but I think also it's near amenities, and sometimes I think it takes us to try something different and commend the developer and see how it goes, and it'll be one of those things that I'll watch over the next few years, and maybe I'll look back and think, Mr. Pittner and Mr. Wolski were absolutely right. I hope not, but I can understand that that's the challenge, and I'm excited to see how this develops, sir, so I'm going to support it tonight.
Any other discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have motion to approve. Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
No.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
No.
Sitma.
Yes. Motion approved. That takes us to number 8, personal appearances. This one is once again where I'm just going to make the announcement that if anybody does have anything that they want to submit online to the Minot City Council, that they can go to minotnd.org. There is a portal there where we have had several submissions. We did have another one that was actually submitted today that was requesting about some of the acquisitions into the Railroad Avenue. I did have an opportunity to quickly email Mr. Zakian, who reached out to the individual with a very lengthy but detailed, and I appreciate the detailed because in that circumstance, going through the acquisition, what kind of time frame, but more importantly, why things kind of slowed down a little bit is relevant right now. So for the folks that do want to come up for personal appearances through, I think, the electronic means, please go on to minotnd.org and submit those. If it's something that we can't address specifically very quickly, we'll certainly have our city clerk read those as well within the record. With that, we move on to miscellaneous and discussion items. This is 9.1, the outline for the 2021 budget priorities. A draft of budget priorities for the 2021 budget cycle have been developed by staff. This agenda item is an opportunity for the council to suggest modifications and adjustments. I would look to our finance director for perhaps a brief overview and any other details.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we quickly addressed this at the city manager's update, and some of these budget priorities are similar to ones in the last year or two. And I know we're very aware of the financial landscape that we're up against this year. So I think our focus was to maintain our existing equipment and assets before we add a bunch of new projects or assets. So I think that was the general consensus, that we are trying or anticipating a very lean budget, and while still trying to be as efficient and effective at operating the city's government as we can. So again, that was a starting point, and maybe we can get Derek to put that list back up on the screen here. But we are open to suggestions or input, or maybe some changes to go a little bit more refined direction.
I might start off very briefly, and then I'll certainly look to everybody else, and we can take it around the horn a little bit. After what the governor had kind of outlined, I think over the last couple of days, when he had his budget discussions late last week, looking at potential cuts. I know the state is going to be going through their processes, and I'm certain that Governor Burgum is going to be looking for maybe some of those potential, let's say, cost savings by integrating technology. I'm not sure where they're exactly heading with all of that direction, but I think it might be an opportunity without completely swinging the pendulum far to one side in trying to say that we're going to all work remotely. I don't think we have that capability, but I think that there is the opportunity to not necessarily roll out a full plan, but start walking down that road a little bit to see where we may have some opportunity for that down the road. I also hearken back to some of the conversation that happened in our last city council meeting, taking a look at some potential positions that we may not want to go ahead and rehire right away, and that, of course, was our economic development specialist, who unfortunately did not start right away. However, I think that there might be an assessment from our executive team and others within the city. If there's a chance where we delay some of those for pertinent reasons, I would like to see some of those come forward, or any other creative ideas, as several online polls that I saw recently, not scientific, keep in mind, but online polls that were put out there is, do you plan to make less money, or are you budgeting to make less money in 2020 because of COVID-19? I think most folks, there are exceptions, but most folks can agree that it is going to impact them. I would like to take a look to see how we can, as we put it last year, hold the line, but if there's other areas where we can maybe push a couple of things back that don't fundamentally go against taking care of our infrastructure and watching some of that fall apart. But I'd be interested to see what options staff might be able to come up with or suggestions.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I would like to point out, in some of the communication that I've seen in the last couple of days, there was some terminology used, and I just want to point out that the city is well-positioned to withstand this economic downturn. So, you know, I don't want everyone to get the impression that we're in dire straits here by any means, because that is not the case. So we're well-positioned. You know, we have a good staff, and the direction that they've been given already is, you know, we're not necessarily waiting till 2021 to begin to address this. So we're already looking at ways to be leaner. And, you know, the direction is, if we don't need it, we probably shouldn't be buying it, or we should be reassessing what is absolutely a need at this time too. Some of this change in how we operate has had some unintended consequences. Conferences haven't been held, so they've been canceled or postponed. A lot of our trainings that we traveled for in the past have had to be done remotely. So we've realized some savings in those types of things that we normally wouldn't see, or we would be spending those funds. So there are some things where we've been able to save a few dollars just because of the way we've had to change the way we do business.
Alderman Patagula, you had raised your hand.
Thank you very much. I guess I wanted to compliment the finance director and city staff on a much tighter and leaner and meaner set of priorities than last time around. I think that's very good. I also am pleased to see that we're already making significantly more conservative kinds of spending decisions. So I think this list of 8, I don't know what it was like last year, I think it was like 10 or 12, is much more appropriate. The problem I have is with the process, and I regret I didn't catch this earlier, and it was kind of sneak by us, maybe not deliberately, but the prior year, the council was in charge of setting priorities and as a whole, and delegated those to the city manager, and they were refined over a period of a few months. This time the priorities were first set by the executive leadership of the city manager and executive leadership of the council, and I don't like that. And I think in the future, it has to rest with the council, has to start with the council. And I feel badly that I didn't oppose the budget schedule when it was first proposed, or when it was amended. I think the council is responsible for setting those broad parameters, and I don't think that should be delegated to anyone, frankly. The other comment I have is that the economic situation changes day by day. And while I appreciate the city finance director and acting city manager's, I want to say optimism, positive attitude toward this, I'm not so sure that I'm willing to be that positive. I submitted, when the former city manager requested input on this, I submitted 2 items. The first item was to try to maintain city staff and not lay anyone off. The second item I submitted was to really defer any major new expenditures, just out of an abundance of caution. And I know the atmosphere, the general parameters that the acting city manager is setting are very much consistent with my suggestions. But I am not so positive, and I think we have to lay back. We have to build up our resources. If the economy dramatically improves and stays improved through the year, then I'll feel very good about that. But I personally think we need to cut back a bit. You know, when you look at what's reported in the news media, the president of the bank, or chairman of the Bank of America, said his economists are predicting 18 months before the economy recovers. Who knows what's going to happen? So I think this is a time for prudence and for caution. And again, I accept the fact that that's built into the DNA, if you will, of city staff at this point, and hopefully the council. But I just want to go on record as saying that I think we need to be very, very prudent, and I'd rather we be more guarded in our optimism and then be pleasantly surprised, you know, with the economic downturn, with the oil prices falling apart, with the world economic problem, and of course with the pandemic. You know, today, the president said he expects 100,000 Americans to die. That's going to have a devastating impact on the whole economy. So I'd like to see us even be more prudent. So just for the record, wanted to say that.
Any other discussion regarding budget priorities? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. A couple comments here. One, just sort of reflective of the larger political process and the way the pendulum swings here. We've had, in my time in council, 3 difficult budgets, 2 of them with significant tax increases, one where we held the line on taxes. If I were to prognosticate based on the way politics works, I would say there's a good chance we will see more conservative members on the council moving forward. And so I think that is something that I believe the staff should be prepared for. I know you guys are setting conservative budgets to begin with, but it's entirely possible that it may not be enough for the citizens in terms of the people they send to sit in these chairs. And so I would encourage you all to be prepared to have what I think is likely to be a more difficult budget process than we have been through in the last couple of years. One of the things that I would encourage all of us, council and staff, to start coming to terms with, and I think we've made really great strides in this over the last few years, is to define the terms under which we want our lowest cost government. If we do that in 1-year cycles, we can always produce a lower cost, but there are consequences that start to impact us very shortly thereafter. We've seen that with deferred maintenance on roads and with attempts to cut through staff, how that occasionally works against us through turnover and increased training, et cetera. So, but I think we need to really start to zero in on that term in which we are trying to deliver the lowest cost government, whether it's a 5-year cycle or a 10-year into the future. Forecasting has obviously gotten very, very difficult. I agree with Alderman Padragula in the sense that my outlook is probably a little gloomier. And so the couple points that I would invite consideration of are control costs, control costs, control costs. If we have cash, save it, because we may not know what we're going to get, and we have our projections, but, and I've said this a bunch of times at our previous meetings, we are in a circumstance in which nobody has any experience. The only difference is some people wear ties and some people do not, but I think we all have the same level of not knowing what's going on, and so let's be cognizant of that, because we just don't know. And so cash is going to be very valuable. And that's it. I'm going to stop there. I've got some other ideas I've shared with Mr. Lakefield, and I'm going to introduce, I think, in some other forums. But thank you for that. And I wish you all luck on your 2021 budget, because I do believe it's going to be a difficult work.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll take the opposition of Alderman Padragula and Alderman Wolski. I think the city is, like Mr. Lakefield had said, prepared for something like this. Maybe not exactly like this. I don't think anybody is exactly. But again, I think focusing on city infrastructure, maintaining it, improving it. And another thing that I would add to this is making sure we get the bang for our buck that we can get. Because our city budget is north of $200 million, if I'm not mistaken, but the amount that's leveraged from other organizations, whether it be the federal government or DOT, I mean, we need to take advantage of those dollars when we can, because they may not be there the next year or the year after. We may have to wait another go around, and those dollars may not suffice for some of those projects because we've let them deteriorate to a certain extent. Roads, through a pandemic like this, if I need a new roof on my house, because it's leaking, I better do it. Otherwise, I'll be replacing sheetrock, I'll replacing insulation. I mean, those things tend to deteriorate and add costs beyond that. So I don't think anyone feels comfortable in the position we're in, but I do feel like we're in good hands, and I do feel like we're going to put our best foot forward with some of these projects and leveraging other people's dollars as far as other organizations, NDR funds and stuff like that. I think we've done a good job in the past. I think we've done a really good job in the past, grants and such. So I'm interested to go through this budget process, and I commend the staff on the hard work of everything they've done. And like I say, I'm going to remain more optimistic on this. I think we need a balance of that. I don't fault anyone for having maybe a pessimistic or a gloomy approach, but I'll ride the other side of the line. So,
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess from my standpoint, because I see Mr. Feltner and he's a professional, I'm going to be really curious just about the airline industry in this country and how it affects us locally. Clearly, the airline industry got a bailout. Is the city of Minot Airport going to get a bailout over the coming months? If
The answer is yes.
yeah, well, great. So I guess as somebody who's probably in all likelihood, and I'm going to throw probably a few audibles, but I'm going to lose my entire summer business. And I'm sitting here now like, yeah, I got an audible. I got to be mindful of how it's going to play out. To Alderman Walski's point, I think that the budget cycles that we've been through and the taxes, the increases and the stress on the public where we're currently at, I'm going to probably lean in right now, and I'm going to say, Mr. Lakefield, it's probably in our best interest to hold the line on the step increase. I know I'm not going to sit up here and make the final determination on that, but I know we should be thankful that we have the great employees we have. I think pay increases when folks are struggling across the board, I think is going to be a tough one. I'm very mindful that by saying that I've made enemies already in the room, but these are the tough decisions that business owners have to make, and I'm mindful of that. I guess, Mr. Mayor, one other thought, just because I had written it down, that depending on what happens with the recycling discussion moving forward, sir, there's the money in there for the transfer station. At some point, the public, because that money was in community facilities, the public wants to see some type of community facilities moving forward. Clearly, in the pandemic, we got to take care of the nuts and bolts, but at some point when you and the council makes a determination on that money should either be utilized or go back into community facilities. But I, like everybody else, I'm gonna I might end up selling snakes at the pet store, I guess, because I might not have another job. So I wish you all well, and I want to be optimistic. I think we're going to come out of it, but it concerns me to see so many people struggling, and I hope that we're going to be able to roll out of it, and it's not going to be real painful on our medical staff and the rest. But I just think we have to keep all of the balls and be a little more mindful of what's happening throughout the community. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I don't have a particular problem with these 8 items, but I do have some affinity with the people who've said that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, and I guess one of the things that I see that's not stated explicitly in here that I think really is kind of at the heart of what we do and who we are, and that is that we need to make sure that the budget prioritizes and ensures the provision continued provision of the essential city services that is what we're all about. And like I say, obviously it's kind of assumed, but I think that's a important thing for us to remember.
Alderman Olson.
Last but not least, I am fine with the priorities as they're listed as well. I do best when I have data. I have appreciated in the past, and I know that you've been a big part of this, Mr. Lakefield, in providing data for us. I have felt very comfortable in the fact that we've been working on a 5-year plan. I've been up here long enough to know, early on it was changing on an annual basis, and a lot of it was determined by the butts in the seats on what was what was our forecast for the next year. I've appreciated the data, and so I'm looking for the data so that we can make smart decisions. And I know that there are questions that we can't answer right now because we are in uncertain times, but as much data as you can provide to us, it'll be very helpful going forward.
It's always a dangerous thing, Alderman Olson, asking a finance person for lots of data. But I agree, thank you. I did want to mention one thing for the folks at home, seeing is that there's, well, more than 100 plus people that are watching right now and likely more that will watch down the road. This current budget cycle, was it $274 million, Mr. City Manager, that our current budget is sitting?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, but that, just to caveat that includes the entire cost of some of these major projects, including state and federal funding as well.
Thank you, and that was a point that I wanted to drive home. Our current property taxes this year, mill levy, we gathered about $39 million, give or take, in that proximity, and I'll just look for a quick verification one more time as I'm seeing the eyes go back and forth here from our finance director.
If you give me 1 second, I can look it up here, but I think
And
it's
if
actually,
it's 38, but
it's actually considerably less than that,
okay.
I do believe.
The point being is that $274 million, a significant portion of that is coming off of these federal grant dollars, whether it be National Disaster Resiliency, programming NAWS, programming the flood control, the buyouts, all of these programs. Where do we fall in with a local property tax there, Dave?
25.3 million.
25.3 million is our local property tax. So out of that 274, and that was a tough aspect for a lot of people to get their heads around, especially out in the public, and how we were spending so much money. When we spend these federal grant dollars, we have to account for them. This is all stuff that the aldermen sitting here know. But I think it's important for the people at home to know literally how much of our local property tax out of that 274 is actually generated locally. So as we see the 2021 budget evolve, we are going to have flood control. We are going to have NDR projects that we have to account for those monies. We have NAWS, so that we will expect to see a large number, but where we really are dialed in to where I think all of the priorities that we will see is off of our local property tax dollars and how those are being spent, and also how we can leverage those to the best that we can, while being mindful of the current economic climate situation. So I just wanted to take that moment for the people listening at home. I know that it will be questioned again on why our numbers are so big, but to follow the principles of accounting, we do have to account for those federal dollars and grant dollars and other matching funds from the state as we move through these projects. Any other discussion on principles before we move on? Alderman Olson.
One bit of data that I will be requesting for Mr. Lakefield is the cost in staying with the pay plan and what that equates to our average homeowner, whether we move forward with the pay plan or whether we freeze it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Olson. Any other questions or discussion? If not, I know we have a lot of significant information ahead of us, and certainly we will look forward to those deep discussions. That takes us on to our final item under the at least general discussion here, the interim government and leadership discussion items. And I want to just zip back to the interim government leadership discussion and action items. Alderman Janser did send out a little bit of information, and I will look to Alderman Janser. Seeing as last city council meeting, we took some time to discuss some suggestions, and Alderman Janser had sent out recommendations for immediate consideration with, I think, 10 different items. Alderman Janser.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we were discussing this topic last meeting, I made the suggestion at the end of the meeting that, it might be useful to sort of start with some immediate things or things that were kind of a priority, and then move on perhaps to other things. And I'm kind of referencing the memo that Alderman Padregula sent out, I believe, to everybody, or had sent out to everybody, and the information that Alderman Wolski passed out last week as well. And and I guess my first comment would be that there, there's more work to do than what's in these 10 items. But my attempt was to try to take a look at things that perhaps we ought to consider doing now, knowing that there is more work ahead on some other aspects of this. I have a couple of, I guess, I would say changes even to what I sent out. And I just would maybe cover those briefly. We've already taken care of number 10, which was the previous item on our agenda brought by the HR director, and I'm thankful for that. And item number 5, I think we have to just get rid of the executive committee name so that there isn't any confusion. My intention in that item was that there just simply be a continuity of government where if the mayor's gone or unable to take care of things, that the council president runs the meeting or does whatever has to be done. And if both of those people are gone, then the council vice president. And we've had a couple instances where, in fact, that occurred, so things can continue. But I think eliminating the name executive committee or getting rid of that as a entity, so to speak, makes good sense. I know Alderman Padregula had pointed that out in a back and forth email that we had. Secondly, under number 7, a couple of people, I think Alderman Padregula and actually our city attorney, pointed out that if we have 2 aldermen appointed to a task, whether we like it or not, it's a committee. And as such, the meetings need to be noticed. They're subject to all the public meetings and open records laws. And so, my suggestion of 2 aldermen, and actually in the case of Alderman Wolski's suggested structure, we would be dealing with that whole requirement. And we should just, be aware of that, or select an individual alderman and then not be subject to those requirements. So that it's just something for you to be aware of and to be corrected in the suggestion. And then beyond that, there are a couple of other things such as instituting an annual employee satisfaction survey for all employees and some of those kinds of things. So anyway, I present these for consideration. I've had some feedback, some of it mostly positive, some of it not so much. And so I guess that's what we're here to discuss. But I thought at least it was a starting point for us to begin discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Alderman Janser. And looking at a number of these recommendations, I see a lot of positive, I think, intermingling of some of the different ideas. I firmly believe that we do need to begin a search for a new city manager as soon as possible. I also do want to take the opportunity, as I mentioned at our previous city council meeting, as with a brief understanding as our former city manager Staub, is that I can't support that, only given some of the misunderstandings within the NDR program of commitments that were made to the community Mr. Zakian outlined $500 million worth of commitments. Many of those that were committed without asking our partners either in the state or even locally. And I think that essentially was just kind of the move it forward attitude without a full understanding of really what the commitment was made to the community. The CDBG DR program on 16th Street LLC that is currently in litigation is another one of those HUD obligations, federal guidelines of essentially just the issues of being compliant and understanding how important that is. And I also hearken back to Home Sweet Home. Those were negotiations that took place in late 13, 14, and 15 with other meetings that were held on community partner land. I think if we are truly looking at moving forward, Mr. Staub certainly had a lot of great momentum and I think a very positive attitude in many areas, but I think moving forward, we should go out and find the right guy that is going to be permanently for the job for a contract, and take the issues that were and leave them in the past that we've been dealing with, and that we actually dealt with tonight, with actually approving the submission of phase 1 and 2 that had never been done by a council. Those type of things for compliance mean a lot. And I think it's great that we've got Mr. Zakian, but I truly do want to go out and find the right guy for the job that's going to be the right guy for the entire city of Minot, the staff, the council, but moving forward. And I think that's an important aspect. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I guess I failed to add one comment that I had meant to make, and that is that in looking at this, I think it's very important, especially at this time, that we consider the input from the department heads, from the staff, as presented in Mr. Lakefield's communication to us. I do agree with Alderman Padragula's comment, I think it was last week, that somebody needs to be in charge. And I think that the staff's support for the form of government as a structure to be retained, but with some modification, particularly additional communication mechanisms, I think is certainly acceptable to me, and I think we need to take that seriously. And then also their suggestion that we find a new city manager to fulfill that role without extensive delay. So that is part of my thinking in a couple of these recommendations.
Any more discussion regarding any of, I would look to Alderman Pittner now.
Thank you, Mayor. I was asked if I had any thoughts on the Lee Staub issue. I guess at last meeting I said I wouldn't be able to pick him out of a two-person lineup between him and Alderman Straight. So, and I still wouldn't. But again, I agree with Alderman Janser. I think this is something we have to look to our staff and our department heads and maybe weigh. I will be reaching out to department heads, especially after Mr. Lakefield, which, again, I'll take a break and say that I really appreciate that email, Mr. Lakefield, discussing what goes on in department head meetings. I think that's very enlightening for us to know that whether there is some distension or some discontent between department heads or maybe a resounding unification on certain issues. So I will be reaching out to department heads to get their opinions on that, because they're the ones who have to work with this individual day in and day out. But I do also believe we need to find some permanence in that position moving forward. I also agree with Mr. Lakefield's assessment in the email that he sent out, the correspondence, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We had something happen with and some dysfunction take place within our organization. We need better communication. We need maybe some small changes, some small tweaks to this organization, but we don't have to completely gut what we have. We have something that works. and sometimes things go awry. Communication breaks down, and I think that's what we had. So again, I'm not ready to implement anything, I guess, too resounding at this point. Maybe next meeting I will. I'll be reaching out to department heads and staff to kind of get their opinions on some of this. They're the ones who went through what got us here, I think. I think that's who we really have to look to, not to any of us, as to what's best for them. I'm willing to listen to them, and I need to listen to them and weigh that in my decision moving forward.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. And I would also just briefly touch on agreeing with not reinventing the wheel, but 160-plus pages on the ICMA Essentials of Council Manager Relations is a good read. I got through all but I think the summary at the very, very end. I'm sorry, not the summary, but the index in the very, very end. I was also former Alderman Seymour from Minot, who's out in Fargo, had sent some literature on keyboard behaviors and structural. I think a few other people may have received that as well. Structural within leadership and government. It very much mirrors exactly what the City Council is of today. However, I think that there are adjustments that likely are coming. And I can very much appreciate that. And maybe not only efficiency, but some of that separation that would alleviate some of what was revealed within that report. I would look, and I don't know if we need a motion for our HR director to begin that process of looking for a new city manager. Lisa, do you have any insight on that process?
Mr. Mayor and Council, what I would probably suggest is I would like to reach out to some of these firms because getting proposals from them really is the first key. After we've received several proposals, then maybe it might be prudent to put together a committee who might want to look at those from the council to decide what proposal would be the best. But reaching out to those agencies really is the first step.
And that doesn't cost us
That doesn't cost us anything.
Okay. I would look to see if anybody else would have a problem with that at this juncture from council. Alderman Straight?
Mr. Mayor, I absolutely don't have a problem with that. To Alderman Pittner's point, I think thanks to Mr. Lakefield and the department head recap, I have no problem moving forward if that's the direction the staff want to go. My only point in trying to talk about a different structure was to try to elevate staff if they so wished. And that was kind of the idea of talking about this kind of three-headed stool idea. And if folks don't want to go in that direction, I certainly I'm willing to go in the direction the staff ultimately want to go, because they are the professionals that will continue to do the great work that they're doing. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll support that.
Alderman Wolski.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. John, I think beginning this process to reach out is a good idea. Get a sense of what's available to us and what ideas everyone brings to the table. I have a couple different perspectives on some of this. I absolutely appreciate all the input we've had from staff along the way, but I don't want us, we the council members, to diminish our role up here. We are the elected officials. We are the ones ultimately responsible for the decisions of the city, the finances of the city. It stops with us. And so we need this to be a collaborative process, but please do not diminish your respective roles. And I'm looking around to my colleagues who are going to continue to be here, knowing full well that I will likely not have a voice in a significant decision in our future. I also want to relay a story that I shared with Alderman Padragula, Alderman Janser, Ms. Junt, and Mr. Lakefield earlier today. There was a church in town maybe 10 years ago that had a pretty significant fracturing. Internal circumstances went awry, feelings were raw, people were hurt, jobs were lost. It was just a very traumatic experience for a congregation. And I thought the approach that was taken following that fracture, I believed to be a very emotionally mature approach, which was and I think it was at the direction of the Synod that actually helped provide guidance and suggestions of how to go, but it was don't rush into anything. It was find some distance, find some interim help that it was helpful in the specific challenges that were being experienced, which was the trauma, the crisis, the hurt feelings, all of these elements, and gain a little distance and gain a little clarity from the very difficult event, and then move forward after that. And I think that process that I observed that church go through, and I don't have exact timeframes, but I think it's been probably 10 years, was healthy. And it was productive for that congregation, and I think they have come through stronger. And so I want to at least enter that idea into our thinking, because I think we might need a little bit of that. We might all be, our staff members, our executive team, we the council, we might all be a little too close to this right now to be rushing into, let's go find the next person. And I'm also concerned that in that action, we have a little bit of a stigma right now. We might not have the best reputation, and so it might not be the most productive time to go out looking. We give ourselves a little time to really begin that process. We might gain a little bit. And then the other piece that I would add is that if I were asked to write a job posting or a job listing for what I want in a city manager, and I do believe that responsibility really rests with the council. That is our job. I don't know what it is. And that is something that I need some time to think about. And I hope our new or our prospective council members, those who are seeking office, are thinking about it as well, because I do think, 3 of the 5 who are running are going to have a voice in that conversation. And so I think it's absolutely prudent to begin this process, to reach out, Ms. Junt, see what's going on, see what type of services are available, and then bring back what we learn. But I know as far as I'm sitting here for the next 3 meetings after this, I'm probably not inclined to rush right out and begin a recruiting process for a new city. But for what it's worth, so everybody knows where I'm at, I guess that's my comment.
Lisa, if you could refresh my memory and lots of other folks, from the time that Mr. Staub had resigned to the time that our former city manager was hired, there was a significant period of time in that.
Mr. Mayor, generally, an executive recruitment lasts about 16 weeks. There may be a lag depending on how long the individual that you make an offer to. I mean, they might have some requirements of time to give to a previous employer, but the actual recruiting itself is usually a 16-week process.
Okay. So there is a significant amount of time ahead of us regardless for that recruitment. Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Junt, I think we need to address that there was a letter to the editor, and I think, I personally, and I think that all of the council members also received an email in support of a local person who may or may not be interested in this position. I have not spoken to that person. But if there are local people that are interested and we could forego, a consultant, is that a possibility? What are our hands tied with anything? Are there concerns that you would have with that?
That certainly is the decision of the council. If they would rather us to start a local recruitment process prior to going out to a firm, that's certainly your prerogative to do so. We do have limitations on some of our reach with regard to reaching out to maybe more individuals than an agency would, but certainly that is your prerogative to do that. I just would have some concerns that we do have some time constrictions with that. That would put some things off a little bit longer, so that would be the only thing to really think about.
Okay. And I do agree with Alderman Walski when he said that I think we do need to set our priorities too. I mean, we need to know what we want in that position if there are changes that need to be made. But I think that there is always a lot of support, to hire locally if we have qualified people.
Certainly, and I agree with that too, so.
And to that point, Alderman Olson, our current police chief, through a nationwide search, rose out as our top candidate. So that we've got a track record of looking from within as well. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Lisa, just so I'm clear, could you do those, the nationwide and local search, could you do that simultaneously? I mean, just so we're not delaying anything?
Absolutely. Until we enter into a contract with an agency, we can do what we want.
Okay. Okay, just want to make sure that that's a possibility. And if we could do that, I'd feel comfortable with that. If anyone listening and wants to be the next city manager, contact Lisa Junt.
Ms. Junt, I think then we would look for reaching out to those consultants and getting some of their feedback or their proposals back to us for consideration. And from that point, perhaps we can get together and make an appointment with recommendations of a hiring committee or what that might look like.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Any further discussion for the better of the order tonight? Alderman Pataguila.
Yes, I had about 3 things I wanted to say regarding this leadership issue. And the first thing I wanted to say is I think we're already seeing significant changes. A couple days ago, we received a very nice email, those people on the council, from the acting city manager, in which he reported back very frankly and I think very tactfully on where the department heads of the city stood. In the 12 years I've been on the council, this is the first communication like that we've ever gotten. It's been the department heads here, it's been the council here, it's been the city manager in the middle. And this is a marked change, it's a positive change. I think people need to know about this. I think we're already moving in that model, in that direction of more participatory and collegial governing and administering. And I want to publicly praise the acting city manager for that, and also the department heads for being able and willing to speak candidly and giving us their perspectives. So I think that in and of itself is a very noteworthy thing. The second thing I wanted to mention is I also wanted to compliment Alderman Janser for putting together this list of 10 proposals. It took me 5 pages to say pretty much what he said in 1 page, and I think it reflects my thinking, and I hardly agree with even with what he's proposed and with the changes even, including getting rid of the executive committee. I think this is a very nice synthesis of what I wanted, and maybe a synthesis, a pulling together of what the other aldermen wanted, alderwoman. I had some additional things I'd like to suggest to add on to that. I'm not sure that they're worth taking the time this evening to talk about them, but I would very much agree with Alderman Walski that the council needs to be involved very quickly in setting the parameters for the search and coming up with a job description. I don't know that we need to step back for a terribly long time, but I think that is really the responsibility of the council, and I think we could sketch something out fairly quickly ourselves. We've pointed out that we want more transparency, we want more accountability, we want more efficient use of resources, we want very much more of a collaborative, collegial kind of government. I'd like nothing more than the department heads to be at the same table with us, not sitting down below us. So I think we're very close to a consensus. I don't think we need to have a perfect document. One of the things our former city manager talked about was how it would take 2 years, I think, to come up with a strategic plan. No, I don't think so at all. I think we can cobble together, we can pull together a good, decent document to start with, and part of that would specify what the role of the city manager should be. I have no problem doing it sequentially. I have no problem with reaching out to search firms, Lisa coming back and giving us some sense of what the numbers are like and what their advice is, and then us sitting down and being responsible for crafting that job description. Some of it I think will be open-ended because there's some really good things going on in the council and in the city government. So yeah, I think we can kind of meld the two approaches, if you will. I would like to see, to kind of help carry out what Josh has been pushing for, is very shortly after the new council is seated, I really would like to see a planning session, a retreat meeting where the new council members can join the ones that stay on the council and start hashing some of these things out. I think we should be looking at maybe bringing in a budget meeting too that was eliminated in the budget schedule. I think we need to start working toward that consensus as soon as we can. And I'll be proposing some of these other things. I'll be sending them out before our next meeting. But I think getting the council involved very quickly is an important thing. And I see us actually working much more in sync than we ever have in terms of the council, the department heads, and the acting city manager. I'm very pleased. I'm delighted to see this happening. So although we face significant financial challenges, I think we are actually starting to coalesce and come together around a pretty good vision for the city. It might not be a perfect vision, but I think it's a good vision. So I'm excited about that process.
There's only one last point that I would like to somewhat address, and that was very well outlined in both documents that were sent out to us, is that there is a point to where I believe as Alderman Walski and even Alderman Janser had pointed out, is that there certainly is a point with the city council as being we're the ones up here with final say and decision. There's also a point to where perhaps alderman or even the mayor could get in too deep into the day-to-day. And that is very well outlined in every document that I've come across in terms of executive paradigms. Not to say that the elected can't be involved, but there is a fine line and a gray area that can get crossed. And I only say that to be cautionary, is that sometimes we can sacrifice efficiency for trying to do too much too deep when it's policy and direction, and the final decision is the process. Obviously, that the elected want to be as informed as possible, but there are thresholds that can get too deep at times. So that is the final comment that I'm going to make moving forward on that. Certainly, we will see a lot of different, I think, different movement in the next 3 weeks to probably 3 months. Any further discussion for the good of the order, Alderman Straight?
Mr. Mayor, can I just have a check-in with our acting city manager? Is he comfortable with this, where we're at? Does he need a little more direction? Does he, I'm just kind of curious, because I know that, to your point, Mr. Mayor, everybody sends out a memo and there's discussion, and then we go home, and I'm wondering, the staff feeling better about what we just talked about, or not so much? So.
Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, we did have some, I think, fairly open and candid discussion at our meeting last week. When we scheduled that meeting, we were hopeful that there was going to be some action at last Thursday's meeting, and that was the intent to scheduling that meeting, is so we could discuss our next steps forward in line with that guidance. I think the thing that we're most concerned about as a staff is that we need some stability at this time. And that's why I think the initial offer by Mr. Staub to come back was probably a very easy way to get some of that stability injected into the organization. So it was very appealing for that reason. I think the staff's concern at that meeting that it didn't appear that was going to be unanimously accepted by the council. That was a concern, that they didn't want to bring forward something and try to push that agenda when we knew that there was going to be some division. So I think they're very aware and conscientious of those dynamics. But I think we're in a good place. I mean, we have a good team, and they're working diligently to make sure that the operations are not impacted, or impacted is, a minimally amount. I think the sooner that we can get some clear direction, that will do us a lot of good. And I was just going to point out, I think in one of the last meetings that I believe it was you, Alderman Straight, had asked if I would serve as the interim city manager, I think until the next meeting. So I don't know if my term is up or if I'm going to get an extension here, but I think some direction is very critical at this time.
Well, I would look, Mr. Lakefield, for at least another 30 days. I know that given the budget situation, there is a tremendous amount of time and effort that you and your staff within your department also undertake. I would look to see that if you have any objections to that, and sometimes I'm remiss by asking this literally in front of everyone else, so I apologize to that. But are you comfortable, let's put it for the interim, and if there comes a time where there is too much work, I think it would be prudent even to come back to the council to see if we can make adjustments to that for the benefit of the whole. So perhaps maybe that would be the best way to look at this for the interim, as we're going to start the process of looking for a full-time city manager. But I'm certainly would like to hear what you have to say about it.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'm agreeable to that, and I know it's very cliche, and I've said it 100 times, but everyone has stepped up to do their part and is very helpful and offered a lot of guidance. And we have started some of the discussions, at least in my department, how things might look going forward. Initially, when our software project started out, that was kind of my baby, and I was going to own that, and it didn't quite pan out the way I envisioned it from the start. I think some of the really time-consuming stuff is a little bit behind us, and we still have a long ways to go yet. But I've talked to my staff too and said, if this plays out a little bit longer than anticipated, we want to be able to accommodate that and just maybe call an audible a little bit. And we have uncovered some hidden gems in our staff that had some talents that probably weren't being utilized to that degree. And they've really risen to the occasion and have been carrying this project, to be quite honest with you. So it's been enlightening to see some of that, and some of these people have really stepped up to the plate here.
I will say I did like the name Jarvis. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Mr. Lakefield willing to step up to the plate, but no offense, Dave, you're not a city manager, you're our finance director. I want you to wear that hat and only that hat and be able to focus on that job, and I want to set you up for success. Maybe just for the sake of continuing this conversation at a later date, I know there was talk of possibly another special city council meeting in the interim prior to our next. Could we maybe put this item, maybe direct staff or Kelly to put this item on the agenda for further discussion at that time? I think might give us ample time to maybe reach out to staff and department heads and see what direction they're comfortable going in. At least I would appreciate that.
Likely we will end up with another special city council meeting within a week to 10 days approximate, as discussed previous. But yeah, we can add that to the agenda. Any further comments, discussion? Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, I completely support appointing Mr. Lakefield interim city manager. If we want to do that formally tonight, that's fine. Or if we're all comfortable with head nods, I'm comfortable with that too. I would also invite Mr. Lakefield and all of our staff to, because I am worried about the load going to one person. And I know that you guys are working well together, but if there are ideas for evaluating our organizational structure, if there are ideas for elevating other staff members, 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know, to interim assistant city manager in some capacity. If there are ways to spread the load, improve the organizational structure, I'm all about listening and hearing what those may be. I also think it's important, and I'm looking out to our HR director here too, that we acknowledge the extra role and responsibility, and we need to evaluate a salary adjustment to whatever that may look like. And my assumption that it would be retroactive to the point when people accepted their various roles and responsibilities, whatever may come. And so please be considering all those things for our future discussions, but just wanted that on the record.
Alderman Pittner.
I'll make this really quick, Mayor. I'd mentioned I'm going to reach out to staff for their opinions, but also that's a two-way street. If staff feel strongly about, I encourage the individuals to reach out to me as well if you have a strong enough opinion, and I don't get to you soon enough. So just want to put that out there.
Last call for discussion for the good of the order tonight. One final, Alderman Walski.
And not on this topic, Mr. Mayor Sitma, but I have gotten the sense that there is some urgency and some concern attached to the legislative session. And I just wanted to share for the staff and the council's perspective that I do not feel that urgency. I know that we are worried about the low interest buy down loan, and that is a significant piece on our horizon, and we're very hopeful. But I think the larger pandemic circumstances may have dramatically rewired what we might have anticipated coming from the next legislative session. And so I think that by itself has probably left a little pressure off. But even then, I think there are some other financing options in the works. I had a conversation with Mr. Akron this morning. He enlightened me as to a Corps of Engineers water infrastructure program that is working its way through the federal government, terms and circumstances that are very similar to what we were attempting to get delivered through the state of North Dakota. I've got a couple other points on this here. But with that regard, Mr. Mayor, I thought it also might make sense for you to possibly reach out to both Fargo Diversion, Moorhead Diversion, and the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, two of the other really significant partners, in hopes of helping shepherd the low interest finance program through the legislature. Maybe we could reach out to them and say, hey, we're in a bit of an interim period right now for the next few months. Maybe you guys can help shoulder a little more load than you've been carrying. It may be an idea that allows us to step off the gas with some of the legislative concerns and really focus on the city of Minot, as opposed to a sense of urgency around the legislative session, because I think we can work that out, and I don't want to be compelled to rush for any reason as a result of that. So.
Alderman Wolski, and to the rest of the council, I've already actually had some of these conversations with our consultant, Mr. Gettle, as I think there's a complete reassessment on the state side of what to expect for the next legislative session. I expect some of that reassessment actually to be brought directly back as soon as possible for an evaluation by this council or the next council, whatever that might look like. I can tell you right now that I have had preliminary discussions with the folks from the Red River Valley Diversion. They were distracted a little bit by flooding about 30 days ago and COVID-19 right now. I expect some of those conversations from the League of Cities and the large communities, because it's not just about flood control, it's about infrastructure projects around the state, and I think that that's one of the main components that is often overlooked for that long-term low-interest loan. It's not just about Minot. It's not just about Fargo. It's about a lot of small communities around North Dakota that don't have other borrowing capacities because of their bond limitations or infrastructure. So I anticipate within the next 30 days, a lot of these conversations, especially with taking a look at how oil revenues are looking. Some of those projections are coming out, and what the sales tax is looking like holistically. The Governor Burgum conference on Facebook Live, talking about those state revenues on Friday, kind of gave a real good picture of just how much of our state budget is dependent on sales tax revenues and what comes from the actual income tax and things of that nature. So I would say within the next 30 days, we're going to have a lot better idea of where this is heading on the state side, but also on the local side, and how that's going to play out in the state legislature or on the federal level. I'm somewhat hesitant on the federal level, only because of some of our lack of luck, let's call it, with our flood control on anything federal when it comes to the actual construction portion of it. I have talked at some point as well regarding this new project that is moving through. Of course, I'm hopeful that we might find some assistance there, but I'm also hesitant to rely on the Fed right now, given the nature of everything that's going on nationally. That's where I'm at on the state side. Alderman Wolski.
I appreciate the update. I just wanted to communicate very clearly that I think it's okay if we chill out and watch for a little while, because I think and not feel an urgency to rush in and work. So I think that's what you're laying out too, is that for the next 30 to 60 days, there's going to be a lot of observing. And so that fits a lot of our circumstances well.
Any final discussion for the good of the order this evening? Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to, I've been trying to wear my Census shirt to every meeting, albeit it's
Thank you.
covered up tonight. Wanted to reach out, and I feel bad for Director Billingsley. He had a very robust campaign in place, and maybe at next meeting we could have an update, as I know that hopefully with some of these restrictions being lifted, maybe there'll be some ability to get back out into the community and maybe pump some of our numbers, as we are trailing the other 4 larger metropolitan areas in our state. So if we could do our best, if you're at home quarantining or self-isolating, to take your survey and respond, whether it be by mail or whether it be by online, or maybe go to the city's Facebook page and follow some of the links. I don't think it's lost on us the goal to reach 50,000 population through all of what's going on in the world. So take your census, please.
Fill it out. Thank you, Alderman Pittner. I appreciate that. I know Mr. Billingsley does as well.
Have one more item.
Yes, Mr. Lakefield.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to put it on everyone's radar screen that Mr. Gettle's contract is up for renewal as well. He did reach out to me on Friday. He's agreed to the same terms if the city would like to renew that contract again. So that will be coming on next meeting's agenda. So if there's any questions or anything, if you want to reach out ahead of time, but that will be coming up at the next meeting.
I would suggest maybe reaching out to staff that went down and testified, anybody that had interactions with Mr. Gettle, as far as maybe some clarification on that contract and what part he plays for the state, and perhaps we'll have Mr. Gettle by Zoom or another conference call next week for that discussion. Thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other discussion on our agenda, that takes us to number 10. That is for adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.